I was an office boy in a documentary company, and all I did was carry cans to a laboratory. And so I began to think, I want to make a greater film than Orson Welles did at the time at 24. And at that moment, a car screeched to a halt beside me. It was a Citroën, the type of Citroën that in Paris is known as Gestapo Citroën, because they like them so much. And the driver jumped out, ran into a delicatessen, shouted back at his companion in German. And I'd been reading George Orwell, all those John Wyndham, and I thought, what a wonderful idea for a film. I was earning £4.10 a week, which was, what would you say that was?
I mean, literally, you might as well ask me a question about astronomy. I have no $1,000 a week. I don't know what. Not a lot.
So I'll just anticipate your next question. I admit that I was a lunatic to consider it. When the more people said it's impossible, the more I thought, as Napoleon would say, there's no such word. And my mother said, but how on earth are you going to do the Nazi rallies in Trafalgar Square, darling? So I thought I'd do that first.
So you left out the word 18. That's how old you were.
Say it again.
You were 18 years old,
I
correct?
was 18, yes.
I don't know what's more remarkable is that you thought you'd make a period piece about the Nazis invading after Dunkirk and taking over and crossing the Channel successfully and occupying England. You had already made a movie.
I had made a half-hour story based on Guy de Maupassant on 9.5. It was purely amateur, but well, so as it happened here. The thing is,
It was purely amateur. You were 15.
14.
14, sorry, I apologize, yeah.
It took 3 years to make. And the first time I tried the Nazi rally in Trafalgar Square, it was excruciatingly bad. And I had to go back and do it again, and that was awful. It was the third time, it was beginning to get somewhere.
How long from the moment you started production on It Happened Here, or that idea, when the guy yelled back in German at the deli, how long did it take until you were able to screen the film, the finished film?
I gather Turner is flooding the airwaves with World War II pictures. Welcome to the film that took longer to make than World War II took to fight.
8 years, is that right? Basically 8 years.
It's the money. We had no money. Nobody wanted to back it. So, first of all, I have to tell you that I went down to Portobello Road to get German helmets, and I met a collector of that sort of stuff, and I was very suspicious of him to begin with. Andrew Mollo, my God, he changed my life. I was very proud to present my footage to him. And I took him to my flat and set up the projector, and I felt proud. And at the end of the screening, he said, "That is entirely incorrect." And I was outraged. I said, "That's a perfectly..." He said, "The uniforms are ridiculous." I said, "They're American Air Force tunics with swastikas sewn on." He said, "Precisely." He said, "I wouldn't work on this picture unless it was utterly authentic." And do you know what this 16-year-old son of a bitch said to me? He said, "Think of Erich von Stroheim." I said, "I'm the film historian around here, damn it."
I just want everyone to take in, this was a conversation between an 18-year-old and a 16-year-old. So as people will see, how many people here have not seen this movie? Most people here have not seen the picture. So you were going to see remarkably accurate German uniforms, remarkably accurate trucks. Original, right.
Everything in the film that you see is original.
Except what you clearly made were posters. Like you have posters saying, join the English Waffen SS.
Yes.
And those look so unbelievably authentic.
My father was a poster artist, and I've inherited some of his interest in littering.
All right. Well, he was very good, and so are you, because I keep thinking, like, I mean, they appear to be what you would imagine a period poster would look like. All right. So now we could talk for longer than the movie is about the making of the movie, but I want to get to some points that I know people will be extremely interested in. One of the cast members, make sure I have his name right. Yes, okay, I did. So tell me about casting Frank Bennett in the film.
God. This man asked Andrew if he could borrow a swastika flag for a party, and he invited us to the party. And we looked at each other and thought, that's going to be a Nazi party. What would you want a swastika for? But it was April the 20th, which was Hitler's birthday.
Wow.
And when we got there, the place was packed with young men and middle-aged men with various kinds of badges. The British Union of Fascists from before the war, the Hungarian Arrow organization. And I said, I realized what we landed ourselves in for. So I went up to this chap who was the host, and I said, I've always wanted to meet someone like you. How can you justify the camps? He said, oh, that's quite easy. The National Socialists had opposition, just as the British had opposition. And the British put their opponents on in an internment camp on the Isle of Man. Well, the Germans had the Jews, so they put them in internment camps. The Jews are a filthy race. Disease spread everywhere. They couldn't possibly release them on the population, so they exterminated them. It's the kindest thing to do. And when I heard that, I realized nobody, not the greatest screenwriter in the world, could write that stuff unless he was as mentally ill as these people were. So following the point of absolute authenticity, because if you don't believe in what you're looking at, you might as well give up. We cast these people in the roles that they so longed to be of Nazis. And we had a scene in which we interviewed them, or the heroine in the film asks questions, and how they replied to us, they condemned themselves out of their own mouths, but it got us in an enormous amount of trouble. And in the end, the distributor censored the film.
So the scene in question is how long into the film?
7 minutes.
No, how long into the film? They'll see it, they'll recognize it. You see the heroine sort of getting these guys at a party at a hotel, shot at the Rembrandt Hotel, right? So it's a scene at what appears to be a club, and these guys just talk. And you and Andrew got them some liquor, so they felt comfortable, and then they just made their case.
Yes.
So United Artists, though, after initially agreeing to distribute the film, which you thought was...
Let me interrupt you here.
Please.
All these films that you're seeing swamping the airwaves, as I put it, by TCM, they don't tell you what Nazism was. There isn't a film that tells you what National Socialism was, what we were fighting for. Where are the war aims? We didn't hear any war aims about National Socialism. And when I was young, it was a forbidden subject. It was like the Victorian attitude to pornography. And I was absolutely, and Andrew too, absolutely fascinated to find out what on earth we were fighting. What were these people thinking? And that's why we put this sequence in.
It's an incredibly powerful sequence. Now, here in 2019, it is hard to imagine why anyone would censor it, but United Artists, whom you were initially thrilled was going to distribute the film, ultimately said, if you don't take this scene out, no one's going to see this movie.
That's right. And after 8 years, that was rather tough. But it did arouse fury, absolute fury, just as our whole concept aroused absolute fury. The nationalists among the English said we'd have fought the Germans in the streets with broomsticks.
Your take, as this film will show, is that once the Germans invaded, successfully conquered, and won, the English, like the French, like the Belgians, like the Dutch, would have eventually gone on with their lives and made the best of the situation.
Exactly. It's a film about collaboration, and nothing in the picture is not based on what happened in occupied countries, particularly France and Holland. And we used technical advisors of people who were there, and they all agree this is the way it was.
Sure, there are some resistance fighters, but most people want to have a job, want to have something to eat, and want to make do. So what was a bigger obstacle, that or those, and there were some in the critical community, who claimed that by including that scene with Frank Bennett and two other Nazis, by the way, that the film was anti-Semitic. You had to deal with both of those charges, both of which now seem ridiculous, but at the time must have felt intensely real to you.
Yes, and I was invited on a very big television program called Tonight, probably the biggest in England, and so I was completely neutral. I wore a dark green shirt. It was the days of black and white television, and I was a black shirt from the moment you saw me. Black shirt being the word for fascist during that period.
So how did we finally get to the point where after the movie was released, and I mean, some critics overjoyed at it, others incredibly critical, but now, thankfully, sort of universally accepted for being really let me say two things. One, the film is a brilliant independent film. Secondly, your book, How It Happened Here, should be required reading for anybody who wants to understand the challenges of making an independent film. Before we show the movie, one of the many interesting things that I read in your book was that you very quickly recognized the dangers of a director editing his own film. Of a director editing his own film, because you are the editor here.
I don't know.
The dangers of a director editing his own film, the risks. What was the problem with you editing your own work? My apologies, I'm not asking this.
I'm a bit deaf, and I'm having a problem with this echo.
You edited the film, yes?
Yes, yes.
So what were the dangers? What is the risk when you edit your own work?
I see what you mean. Yes, one falls in love with certain scenes and gives them too much prominence, but I think I was ruthless enough to give the weight that the scenes needed and not be convinced by Peter Suschitzky's beautiful lighting.
Your director of photography ultimately goes on to make the Rocky Horror Picture Show and The Empire Strikes Back, just for the record. Last question, when did you get to add back in the scene with Frank Bennett that was initially taken out by UA?
I put it back in for the 16mm release, and I think UA lost interest. So it's back in tonight.
Very quickly, a couple other things. you got help from two people, Stanley Kubrick toward the
I
end,
must tell you this.
and Tony Richardson. Yeah.
Yes. Thank you so much for asking about this. Andrew joined Woodfall and worked as assistant director on Saturday night and Sunday morning. And I said, have you talked about our film to Tony Richardson? He said, oh no, I hate people who do things like that. So, kicking him on the shins, metaphorically, I said, please talk to Tony Richardson. Tony talked to him, and Tony Richardson had a very strange way of talking. He talked like this. And he said, how are you getting on with your film, Andrew? And Andrew told him not very well. And he said, if you can make the film for £3,000, I'll back you. Tony Richardson is very generous. He was the man who got Kes by Ken Loach on the United Artists release and on the world screen. Made people directors and extraordinary man. But no possibility could anyone make a film for £3,000 even then. But at least he did that, and he got us going. He said, you have to shoot it on 35mm and prove to me that you can blow up what you've already shot on 16, which we did. And we were running out of stock, as you can imagine. And I went to the National Film Theatre with Andrew for an Erich von Stroheim film called The Merry Widow. And there was Stanley Kubrick, and he made a film that we worshipped. We thought it was absolutely brilliant, a pacifist film called Paths of Glory, which was banned by the French for 30 years. And we went up to him and told him how much it had impressed us. And he told us he made films as we were making films. And he said, how are you off for raw stock? I said, not very well. He says, here's what you do. Call my secretary Monday morning and I'll ship you the short ends from Dr. Strangelove. Oh my God, we're going to get Peter Sellers in double exposure.
Could you have made the films without the contributions of, could you have finished without Tony Richardson and Stanley Kubrick?
No.
All right, well, you guys are in for an incredible treat tonight. This is just about my favorite movie at the festival. Buy the book, find it, How It Happened Here by Kevin Brownlow. Second annual recipient of the Robert Osborne Award, Kevin Brownlow. Good having you here. Kevin, thank you.